loud all of a sudden in my ear. Good morning, Carrie.
Good morning, Clay. How you doing?
I'm okay. Good morning, everybody.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Bold TV. We got, as usual, never dull moment with President Trump. We're going to talk about the Comey firing. We're going to talk about Black America under Trump. The usual packed show.
It is. I don't know what to do. We're doing our grading thing again. I really don't need but one letter today. It's quite the week. What?
It is. And don't forget to like us, Bold TV on Facebook, and join us on Periscope as the usual.
All the business stuff.
And find us on iTunes and on SoundCloud as usual. And make sure that you share the show with your friends, because that way we can get more of what you love, which is Clay and Bold.
And Carrie, of course, and you too. Wait, will you always remember where you were when news broke that the FBI director had been fired?
Not really.
You don't think so?
Because, you know, Bill Clinton fired his FBI director, no sweat.
True, he did fire his FBI director. His FBI director was stealing things, was doing things that were definitely considered illegal, and also wasn't investigating him. If you want to compare the two, I think you are going to have to really do some yoga.
Was he a leaking sieve, however you say that word?
Definitely not a leaking sieve,
and
that's
was
for sure.
He also a showboater?
Are you kidding me right now? Can I grade you today? Are you taking the president's arguments and using them as your own, even though they don't make any sense whatsoever?
You know what? I'm actually just taking Democrats' arguments. We're going to get into that later.
Okay,
but first, we have breaking news. We have to show this.
Breaking news.
Melissa McCarthy spotted in New York here, but she's dressed up as Sean Spicer. We got to roll the tape. Spicer returns.
So they're shooting. Just to be clear, she doesn't actually get around like this normally. They're shooting some stuff for SNL, which we don't know when it'll air.
So it's the rolling podium is throughout the streets of New York, and it's just brilliant.
I know when I say we don't know when it will air, Ben, I don't mean we don't know what day it'll air, but it may not air tomorrow night. It may air the week after. We're not sure. Ben's like Saturday night in my ear. I think I know that much. But that piece for her, that little bit for her has been
it's gold mine.
But you know, it's an interesting week for her to be Sean Spicer, given that he was sort of benched later in the week this week for Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who took over the White House briefings in the wake of this Comey situation. Why do you think that was?
Well, as I understand it, he had been on vacation.
As I understand it, he had spent a great deal of energy defending and saying that the president had confidence in Comey, and therefore having him go back out and completely change what he was saying would have been very difficult.
Well,
I mean, they love to flip-flop over there
actually,
at the White House.
we have a clip from Leslie Stahl's, the very first interview that Trump gave on 60 Minutes. Let's roll that for a second.
At that point, the discussion turned back to some of the thornier issues Mr. Trump faces. FBI Director James Comey, are you going to ask for his resignation?
I think that I would rather not comment on that yet. I haven't made up my mind. I respect him a lot. I respect the FBI a lot. I think before...
Even though they leak so much?
Well, there's been a lot of leaking. There's no question about that. But I would certainly like to talk to him and see him. It's a tough time for him. And I would like to talk to him before I answer a question like that.
Sounds like you're not sure.
Oh, sure. I'm not sure. I'd want to see. You know, he may have had very good reasons for doing what he did.
Okay, and your thought? Why do we air that?
We aired that to say that he's from the beginning was indecisive. Like, he had not said, my firm, rigid position is I will not fire him. He has my full confidence.
Okay,
from day one, it was always under question.
This is that right there is Bold is better than that, because that's what other networks do. You show one clip that defends your argument when there are many other instances of Donald Trump saying that he had confidence in James Comey. You can't just show one piece of an interview from November and say that that's what his position is, when he has said numerous times that he has confidence in James Comey, that he likes James Comey, that he doesn't plan on firing James Comey or asking for his resignation. You don't show just one of them and say that's the argument. There's a lot more. So that piece, take that piece with an entire shaker of salt.
Well, I think it's important because it was his very first
it was
public
his, it was
interview
his first
after
public
winning.
interview where he didn't know, he couldn't believe that he had won, and he didn't know the answer to many things. He said quite a few things that in that interview that he has not necessarily stood by. I mean, we could go through that entire Leslie Stahl interview. He talks about his positions on same-sex marriage, and then he went and appointed somebody to the Supreme Court who would arguably vote to overturn it if he had the opportunity. I mean, you can't say. I mean, that interview has not reflected the way he has behaved as president since he's been in office. And so you can always find something that's going to defend your argument. And I think that was a little unfair to apply that specific thing. I'm not critiquing you, I'm critiquing the media in general. If you want to talk about media being biased, doing things like that is kind of what bias means.
Well, I respectfully disagree. As
do you?
much as
Well,
I
that's
love you,
okay.
Clay.
That's okay. Feel free to put in the comments
Yes, we
section
want to know what
you
you think.
about whether or not that was biased or not. Let's see if it blows up.
Then how about this? Let's play the tape of Democrats themselves calling out the credibility of James Comey.
Okay.
Let's roll that one.
All I can tell you is the FBI director has no credibility.
You said that he had no credibility. I assume that you support the president's decision then to fire his FBI director.
No, I do not necessarily support the president's decision.
The president ought to fire Comey immediately. And this is a direct attack on the democracy in the United States.
I just have no way of understanding these actions. They're completely unprecedented, and that's why I think he owes the American public more information.
I was stunned, and I'll say I think we're living through the stress test of this 230-year-old democracy. And if you're going to violate DOJ policy, you need a darn good reason for it, and you better have something to say. And here, there wasn't a good reason for it, and he had nothing to say. This letter just raised far more questions than any could answer.
Well, it's incredibly disturbing at many levels.
I am worried about the integrity of the FBI. Suddenly, there is what I call a hocus-pocus move. We then move to another subject. And this one is without a doubt not only explosive, but I think it also goes to the heart of our democracy.
First of all, did we produce that in-house? Is that our thing, or did we get that from
No,
somewhere
we
else?
got that from the internet.
Okay, well, we didn't credit it. That's why I didn't know. But that's okay. That's okay. I thought it was pretty well done. I mean, listen, I'm not going to dispute the fact
It's
that,
from the
yes.
Republican committee, just so you know. They did it together, in full disclosure.
Well, I mean, but listen, they have a point. I'm not going to argue that Democrats weren't saying one thing about Comey and now saying something different. I'm not going to be delusional and pretend that they don't. I will say that I think that if you look at that piece again, the dates on those comments that were anti-Comey from Democrats were all in November, and I'm not saying that they were justified to say he should be fired based on what he did to Hillary Clinton. What I am going to say is that circumstances have changed since November, and you haven't seen a lot of Democrats in the last 2 or 3 months coming out against Comey, and they have been, their position on what he had done wrong in their opinion back in November was different. Today, the reason that the firing is upsetting and should be upsetting to everyone in the country is not because Comey was or was not good at his job, but because it is almost impossible to pretend that the fact that James Comey was investigating the Trump campaign and the Donald Trump administration and his campaign officials in this Russia situation did not have something to do with it. And the New York Times was reporting yesterday and this morning that a lot of this was stemmed from a few months ago, right after President Trump was inaugurated. He had Jim Comey over to the White House. He asked him at dinner. Do I have your loyalty? And Jim Comey said, "You have my honesty." He refused to say, "You have my loyalty," and that's a problem for Trump. And to say that Trump fired him specifically because of his handling of Hillary's emails is just one of those head-shaking, give me a damn break type moments, because that's not why he did it.
Well, I think that, and you're right. I agree that, so I'll concede that the investigation and sort of the way this has gone down, and we have the letter directly from President Trump on the firing, and where he says, "I appreciate you informing me on 3 separate occasions that I am not under investigation. I nevertheless concur with the decision to fire," which he said.
Quite the odd.
It is an odd firing letter.
Let's throw it back up there, Ben, because there's another thing. He said, "I have accepted their recommendation, and you are hereby terminated." But he told Lester Holt yesterday that he had already decided to fire Jim Comey. So, I mean, even between the time that letter came out on Tuesday and yesterday, his position sort of changed. I mean, that only happens when you don't, story changes when you don't have the truth. When you're telling the truth, it's always the same.
Look, I have no doubt that he already had in his mind that he wanted to do it, and he got some evidence to justify what he was doing. But that being said, I do think, let's bring in our guests.
I was going to say, these poor things, they're sitting over here, and they're wanting to talk so bad.
I want them to say things because I want to bring them both into the conversation. They're going to have insights. Let's welcome our guests. We've got Anne Epstein. She's the executive editor at Bustle. And Oz Sultan. He's a counterterrorism and Middle East policy expert. And Oz has been here on the show before. As we know, he was also a Muslim outreach campaign surrogate for Donald Trump in 2016. Welcome to you both.
And you worked directly with the campaign as in that role as a surrogate.
In the war room with Steve Bannon.
Okay, yes. So we just like to clarify that I was a surrogate for Bernie Sanders in a way, but I never talked to the man. So, but you have a real connection to.
And let's pull in a few comments here first before we go to our guests. Pamela Willie Ackerman says it's not only about the firing. You need to look at the entire picture and everything that has come out since. And non-Tashit.
Let's just say NASJT.
Yes, on Periscope says, Clay knows much more than the entire Trump administration together.
Okay, now that's fake news. That's fake news. That's not true.
And then let's see. Yes, and also that same commenter says Comey wanted to he wanted more funds to investigate more fully. Then boom, you fired. Oz, what about that?
Well, I think you have to look at what the DOJ is doing and what Acting Director McCabe is saying right now. So McCabe has come into the fray, and he's basically said, we're continuing to move forward on the Russia allegations. They've put subpoenas out over the course of the weekend. Those dropped on Monday. These are going out to some of Flynn's associates. They're not letting this thing go. All right. So I think the timing of the Comey firing really comes to, look, Democrats didn't like Comey. Democrats weren't happy with Comey. Democrats aren't willing to say they're unhappy with Comey again, going to the video that we just saw. But I think we need someone who's in that role that has a little bit more transparency and perhaps a little bit more esteem from the American people, especially as we're going into these investigations. They're not changing. They're not stopping.
Right. Well, so Acting Director McCabe's testimony yesterday and he did very clearly state that they were going to continue with this. But that's not really necessarily an argument that the Trump campaign can make that Director Comey's firing was not related to Russia because they are going to continue the investigation. There's no way to know that he knew they were going to continue the investigation without Comey. He didn't know that until yesterday.
The DOJ was continuing this. I mean, the FBI and the DOJ work hand in hand in these types of things. And this goes all the way back to pre-Watergate, back to the 50s, okay? So this is an ongoing thing. Now, Comey being the right person to lead this, I think that's the challenge. And the Democrats didn't think he was the right person last year. The Republicans don't think he's the right person this year. To Carrie's point, there's a lot of chagrin on one side, and then when he's fired, it's like, oh, we're so offended. And I think...
Let me call bullshit, though, because that's not necessarily true either, to say the Republicans don't like him as the... I mean, Richard Burr, my senator from North Carolina, chairman of the Intelligence Committee in the Senate, came out very strongly and said that he was disturbed by the firing of Comey. There have been quite a few Republican senators and congressmen and women who have said that they were disturbed by this. So you can't really say Republicans don't like Jim Comey. They believe that he was...
If you were to do a broader sampling, I think you would find that there's perhaps a mixed opinion in Comey, okay, as opposed to a couple senators that you happen to know. But what I will say...
Or the ones who were in charge of the investigation.
Well, let's look at it. Let's look at it this way. Is the timing odd? Yes. Okay, I think a lot of us will agree with that. Is this time where we need someone who's perhaps new in the House, who can kind of clear the air for the American people? Sure. And I think McCabe is starting to lead that. I think we'll find some new leadership in the days coming. But this is also kind of par for the course that you've seen with this new administration. I mean, I think the closest thing you have to this administration is if we had elected Ross Perot in the 90s, okay? Because the expectations...
Less charts, though.
Huh?
With less charts.
Less charts.
Well, let's bring Emily to the conversation. So, Emily, what's your take and what's your pulse in terms of what are millennial women saying about Comey?
I mean, I think the question comes down to does this decision reinstill confidence in the FBI? Does this chaos that's happening afterwards, is that good for the country? Is that good for people that want to see a thorough Russia investigation? And I think the answer there is no. I think that this has, really scared a lot of people, especially millennials, who don't know necessarily what's going to happen. Is there any confidence that the Trump administration can find someone who's a real bipartisan voice that can put this Russia issue to bed, really flesh it out and dig in? I don't think that's there.
Emily, I have to say, so last week I was able to interview the nephew of JFK. Hopefully we're going to have him on the show because he has a new book to celebrate JFK's 100th anniversary of his birth. And one thing he said, he was giving I asked him, what advice would you give to the Trump administration? Because JFK's approval rating when he took office was 70%. And then after 100 days, it was 83%. And guess what happened in that meantime? The Bay of Pigs. Pretty much this huge debacle happened. And what he said, the reason why the approval rating went up was because
there was no media.
Well, no, there was media.
There was no social media.
No, actually,
Facebook and
the
whatnot.
media loved JFK. He was like Camelot. But what he said was that JFK owned it. He got in front of it. He took responsibility. He looked in the camera and said, I messed up. Mea culpa. He came clean, and I just don't see Trump coming clean. Like, isn't that a problem?
That's a huge problem.
Why doesn't Trump just own the fact that there are lots of Russians who have bought real estate in his buildings? Like let's just see what those ties are and then put it to rest.
But there's a lot of uranium that was sold through the Clinton Foundation to Russia. Okay, I mean,
but the Clintons aren't in the White House.
I understand.
The Clintons aren't in the White House.
I understand that. Okay,
So
but
let me ask this. Let's accept the premise that this was not based on Comey's investigation or Comey's leading of the investigation into Trump and Russia. Best case scenario for the Trump administration, it's a really, really big scar on their already pretty pocked record of handling things in an appropriate way, because the public, whether you agree with Trump or not, the public seems to think that this was not really, you used the word well-timed. I'm trying to think of something that was more severe than that. What does this say or continue to say, Emily, I'll let you both answer, about the way Donald Trump handles decisions in his administration?
I mean, I think the word you're looking for is this stinks. That's probably the answer. And I also think, look at the way he fired Comey. Comey was in the middle of a meeting with FBI agents, and someone saw on the television that he was fired. He didn't even know. Trump didn't even have the decency to tell the man himself that he had been let go. What sort of administration is that? How is he running the country when he can't even talk to his top investigator and let him know that he's been let go and let him, resign with dignity?
Why do you think that happened that way?
I think it goes back to what I said about Perot. Okay, let's look at the fact that Trump is not a politician. I mean, JFK, career politician, right? Clinton's career politician.
Still a businessman who has arguably had some degree of success in knowing how to run a business. Is that the way you fire folks?
Well,
he fired me to my face.
I mean, it's...
Yeah, actually, we got a tweet about that. Ben Ratner on our show, he tweeted about that this week. James Comey and Clay Aiken were fired by the same guy.
For the record, I wasn't fired. I came in second, so I just wasn't hired, but we get the point.
Wait,
So,
did you say you got fired?
No, he didn't say you were fired to me. But I mean, defend that. I mean, I don't know that I'm necessarily subscribing to the whole, well, this is what we would have got if we had elected Perot. We didn't. People didn't want that type of leadership in the White House. They specifically didn't.
The reason I'm bringing that up is that you have to look at the fact that you're hiring a businessman. You're not hiring a career politician. And I think Trump's perspective on this is that he wanted to create some distance from the issue, because that's what he's starting to work on now. He's had one round of people that they tried to bring in. This is including Flynn and a variety of other folks that they figured out these aren't the right people.
They figured it out, or they were told repeatedly?
No, they had to figure this out, because think about this. When Hillary came in, she had about 1,000 people ready to be pre-cleared. When we won on election night, there was a big sort of, oh my God, we only have about 100.
There was a national,
people.
oh my God.
No, but there was only about 100 people lined up.
What does that say, though? I mean, every person who's but Mitt Romney had his administration planned out in case he won. I mean, most people do. What does it say that he wasn't ready?
There was a bit of a hullabaloo in between Christie and Bannon, and I think what you ended up with was a shift in terms of a lot of the roles, because we didn't necessarily want New Jersey running the country.
Is it really a good argument, though? I mean, I've got a certain degree of respect for anyone who can come up with these arguments for why this works. Because I'm sitting here listening to you and I'm thinking, okay, from a strategic point, now doubling down on he's not a politician. That's probably a good angle with some of the people who voted for Trump, and that's a good reason.
Yeah.
But give me hold on. Give me a break. That's not a good argument for why you run a nation the way that they're running it. I'm not a politician, so I'm going to kind of fly by the seat of my pants.
Yeah.
And I said that directly to you, so we'll come back to you. But since she brought Emily in, we'll let you say something first.
No, I mean, I just feel like, you brought up Bannon, you brought up Christie. What about Giuliani? You know, like he had all of these surrogates that he needed to win the White House, and then he just left them by the wayside, and now he's doing the same thing to Comey.
I don't think it's leaving people by the wayside.
He strategically uses these sort of puppets that can further his agenda, and then the second their loyalty is questionable or they're no longer useful to him, he just lets them go and lets them rot.
Look, I understand from your perspective there's a lot of disdain for the president, okay? But I don't think we should have that much disdain for the office of the presidency. And he's got folks in there right now, and they are working and figuring these things out. But I will tell you, these are, again, most of the staff is not career politicians. And what they're looking at doing is three things. Bannon was focused on making government smaller. They have started down that path. Secondarily, they are interested in cleaning up this entire Russia debacle because America is watching. Okay?
Are they interested in cleaning it up, or are they interested in just, I mean, there's cleaning up your room, and then, like I did when I was a kid, there's kind of hiding everything under the bed.
Intelligence officials within the Trump administration are already saying that we understand that there was a level of Russian influence. Now, what they're trying to figure out is what exactly was that, because there's a lot of untangling to do, okay? And at the same point in time, you're dealing with new Trump appointees working with existing Obama appointees in a lot of roles. You know, there's thousands upon thousands of people that have to work in sync to get this stuff forward.
Absolutely.
And I don't think that that's working that well right now.
Isn't that arguably Trump's fault? He has the right to appoint all these positions, and he's chosen not to.
He has the right to appoint 4,000 positions.
And how many of those has he appointed?
I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head.
I don't think it has 4 digits in it, though.
But a lot of those people have to be cleared. I have at least 20 friends that are still waiting to be cleared, still waiting for the process of going through Congress. None of that's happened, okay? So on one side, we can say, where are the Democrats working with us hand in hand to get this stuff on the calendar so we can get these people in faster? But on the opposite side of this, yes, he's made a couple of mistakes here. I don't know if he's the type of guy you worked for him. You know, arguably. I don't know if he's the type of guy who's going to respond that way. But I will say this. I mean, what is best for the American people and what's best for all of us right now is having a clear understanding of what's moving forward. And I think McCabe is starting to push towards that. And I think with the intelligence community coming around on the Russia issue, we're probably going to have some clarity in the next few weeks.
All right, let's go
you want a
to
grade.
the grade card. Yes,
Carrie loves her grade cards.
Well, and we know that you, in the audience, you like it too. So we want to know your grades because we want to look at 2 separate issues here, the firing itself and then how it was handled. So let's do a lightning round here. First, the decision to fire, period. And then we'll do how he handled it. So let's see. Everybody ready? 1.
Are we just going to throw it up all together?
Yeah, just throw it up. Yeah,
okay.
1, 2, 3.
Oh, look at that! Look at that. We got some symmetry in many ways. The only reason I didn't give an F is because I do think there's an argument for there are a lot of people in the country who don't trust Comey. I don't think that their distrust is correctly placed, but I can give you just this much room on the fact that if there's distrust in that particular position, it might not be the greatest thing, but that's the only reason it's not an F for me.
Why is it a D for you?
Because it could always get worse. It could always be even more of a disaster when it comes to Trump.
Why's your B? What'd you do the B
for? It's a B because the president has the right and the impetus to hire and fire who he likes, and there were lots of leaks happening.
Just because you can do it doesn't make it right. I mean, that can't be your reason.
No, the reason was that I think that he was politicizing the institution, and I don't think that we want our intelligence services to be politicized in this way.
How do you say he politicized the institution when he went through every painstaking possibility to offend both sides in some way? I mean, if you are pissing people off on both sides of the aisle, you're probably
when you look at the way he was speaking and you listen to what he was saying, like it or not, I'm here for 6 years. Like the way he was approaching it like it was like he was entitled to it. And I just think that that's wrong. And I think that in terms of the intelligence agencies, we want people who are, look, everybody knows how I felt about Trump heading into this, but it's like, I think the one saving grace I've seen is that he's getting serious-minded people around him, and I don't think that Jim Comey has shown that he's got this serious-minded approach to this. He was very, I think, just too overtly, he was making it about him instead of the results.
To add to what Carrie's saying, look, even just go look at what the NSA issues were. The NSA was supposed to stop collecting data on American civilians prior to Obama getting out of office. Guess what they're still doing? They're collecting data on American civilians. So I think when you look at Comey and you look at a lot of these challenges, you know,
Is Comey in charge of the NSA?
Comey's in charge of the FBI, but who?
Okay, I was just making sure we're clear. That has nothing to do with him.
It does come to who can America trust, and I think really going through this process. I mean, look at.
So we fired the NSA director too.
We are. I think they're looking at the NSA right now. Okay, these things are all being evaluated.
All right, we got to move on. Let's go to the actual handling of it itself. And then we'll grade that, and then we're going to move on to our next.
Let's look at the user answers on that first question. FD, FFD, FD. Okay.
I think most of those are Claymates. We got some comments here from Andrew Hobson says, I thought the Dems hated Comey for what he supposedly did to Hillary. And then Bradley says on Periscope, which we didn't show up on the screen, the Democrats hated Comey until he was fired.
And we discussed that, and I didn't.
Till you're gone, whatever that song goes.
Yeah,
I'm
okay,
gonna sing
fair
it for
enough.
you next week, Clay.
Please.
All right, now the handling of it. Let's grade that, and then we got to move on. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Okay, ain't no grade on this panel right here that would have been approved. It would have been okay with my parents when I was in school. You gave him the highest grade, though. You gave him an average grade on C. Why? I gave him a C. Why?
Because I think this is a decision that's being made by a new president in a new role who's coming into finding his feet in politics.
120 days in.
Listen, I think if he can get some of the stuff that he's already started, he's promised and he's started to deliver upon. We're talking about historically black colleges. We're talking about, engagement in inner cities. We're talking about Ben Carson's tour. If we can start fixing some of these problems, I think we're halfway to a better America.
So that was the perfect transition because we're going to be talking on those very topics right now. So thank you for joining us.
Emily Ann and Oz, thank you very much both for being here. Come back. We'll grade some more things. Carrie loves labeling stuff.
No, I love clarity. I love understanding exactly how people think.
Well, good. Did we get grades for that last question? Did people grade the last question on Facebook?
Let's let them collect a little bit and get some thoughts while we bring on our next guest. Kathleen Klein says, good points, Emily. Not just millennials are concerned about what's happening to my country.
Are concerned, period. What's happening in my country is what she says. That's how you should read it.
Apologies for my lack of dramatic interpretation.
Like Kathy. That's what she was. I can see Kathleen.
And Shirley Tovar says, Trump will never admit he is wrong.
And we've got grades from Facebook also on that. Okay, yeah, pretty much. Being a Claymate is an insulting comment. Listen, it sort of can be to some people.
It's not I would consider it a
compliment. I don't think Carrie meant it as an insult.
No, as in like they're just people who.
She was just saying that everybody, all of you are watching because you agree with my politics, which by all means continue to do so. Let's change gears just a little bit, although knowing this show, we'll be right back down that rabbit hole within, let's see, I'll give it 3 minutes. Stanley Fritz is the co-host and engineer of the Let Your Voice Be Heard podcast, and he's a political contributor at Black Enterprise. And businessman, author, and political commentator John Burnett is back with us. They're both returning guests. We're glad to have them both back. And so we're gonna talk a little bit about African Americans under the Donald Trump administration, race relations under the Donald Trump administration. Let's throw this graphic up from the Pew Research Center. We have that? Every time I want to throw to a graphic, they don't have it. Every time you want to throw to a graphic, they're right there. I feel like that's bias.
There it is.
Tell us about it.
So what this is showing is this is conducted right after the election. It talks about how Black Americans largely expected race relations to worsen with Trump's election. But I personally disagree in the sense that I think that Donald Trump offers a historic opportunity here because he's really shaking up the system. I think for bad, but also for a lot of good, like in some ways bad, but in I think a lot of ways with some potential for good. So
okay, well, as a black woman, I respect your opinion on how race relations in this country are going.
For your colorblind, and I think the country should be based on unity and ideas, not skin color.
Don't do the I thing. Don't get angry with. Don't do the I thing. Don't get angry with me. I'm just making a point. Let's bring in our guests. Let's grade. Were we planning on grading this particular issue? Because I feel like it's important. I think we should.
Want to grade?
You know,
We have
this is what
specific
people.
topics we're
This
gonna
is
look
what
at.
this is what people said prior to Trump. Right after the election, how they felt race relations in this country would be in the wake of Donald Trump as a president. He's been in office over almost 120 days now. Do you think that we don't have to grade it, but do you think that people have been right? Do you think they have improved? Do you think they've worsened?
There's no question they've worsened. Donald Trump, in relations with black people, is about as good as black people's relationships with police officers today. Donald Trump is ignorant to anything dealing with African Americans. He thought Frederick Douglass was alive, and he didn't understand why we went to the Civil War. There's nothing to be said about Donald Trump.
When did he think Frederick Douglass was alive? Because that's news to me and fascinating.
Yes, Black History Month.
He said that?
Yes, he said he's a great guy. He's doing great things right now.
Oh God, did he really? Did he really? Why was that not everywhere?
I did not hear that.
I didn't hear it either. We're gonna
find
find.
it.
Okay, we'll have to find it.
Yes.
We'll have to find it
Yeah,
before
we
we
can
do
find
it, because if we can find it, that is fascinating. John, your take on the same question?
Well, I think it's very important to acknowledge what people are feeling, and I think that survey is correct. However, what Donald Trump's intentions are in terms of lifting up the low income, not only black, but black, white, Hispanic, whoever's an American, he's going to pass policies, starting with the tax reform, right, that's sorely needed to bring, one, money that's trapped overseas back on shore to pay out through dividends, which helps pension funds, which helps investors, annuities, life insurance, and also gives growth capital that can also be invested into infrastructure, into other businesses. So I think that's extremely important.
That's turning the question really. I mean, and I think it goes against both of your arguments in a little bit in a way.
Okay.
That's turning the question into less of a race question and more of an economic question. But is that not? I mean, is that not a fair way to assess it for some people? If Donald Trump's policies, if his economic policies disproportionately affect people who are of color, does that make him a racist, or does that make him a person who just has economic policies that are not
I want to
appropriate
add to that
for
question,
Donald Trump is a
because
racist,
if you look
hands
at the outcomes, are
Right.
very different from intentions of the Barack Obama presidency. The black-white unemployment gap widened under Barack Obama. The black homeownership declined under Barack
While the
Obama.
stock market hit record highs.
Well, are we ignoring history, guys? So the reason those things.
Well, let's let him ask because I asked a question and you didn't let him answer.
I agree, though, that the
I think we're apologizing for a racist Trump, and we're also just pretty much disappearing entire facts. The reason those wealth gaps increased was because of the Great Recession. And you know who was hit the hardest by the Great Recession? Black and Latino families who lost the majority of their ownership and buying power. We also know that historically, the average wealth for a white family is about $150,000. For a black family, it's $10,000. For a Hispanic family, it's $13,000.
And I think what Carrie said was pretty much exactly what you said. That Great Recession.
I would disagree.
Well, that Great Recession did affect black families far more than it affected white
She's
families.
trying to put it on Obama, which is
No.
I'm
Okay,
putting it on liberal
regardless
policy
of
because
who.
he had 8 years to try to turn the ship around and help.
Regardless of who it was.
There were a lot of
I'm going to turn
minority.
people's mics off in a second. I swear to God.
Sorry,
Let
go
me ask the question. Regardless of who it was, if Donald Trump's policies, as John believes they will, and I have my own opinion, and I don't necessarily think they will, but if Donald Trump truly believes that his policies, as John does believe, will improve the standing of people who are living in poverty today, disproportionately more African Americans and Latinos, is that not a? I mean, is that if he's successful at making the lives and the employment of African Americans and Latinos and people of color,
Business ownership.
and business is he not? Does he not get a pass to some degree for? I mean, he's not a racist if his policies work for people of color. Is he?
I would so call him a racist. But if his policies actually help African Americans and communities of color, I would give him that.
Okay.
You got that done.
We have the confession.
Unfortunately, his tax plan is horrible, in particular for black people, people of color, and low-income people. First of all, this overseas money you're talking about, he would allow these companies to bring back their money without being taxed for it. So they're getting all this money back for free. Then he eliminates all deductibles. So now all these families, black and brown families who are taking deductions for having children, children, for having homeownership, for being married. You can't do that. Do you know who that hurts? Black and brown people. He also gives huge tax cuts to the super rich, which means that you're going to have to find a way to pay for it. Munchkin has already said that he can't guarantee that they would not have to raise taxes on the middle class. Guess who gets hit by that? Black and Latino people. This idea, we can talk about economics, we can talk about foreign policy, we can talk about The Apprentice. No matter how you cut it, Donald Trump is a racist. His policies are racist, and there is no way that they help any person of color, unless, of course, you're like living in a sunken place.
Let's talk about non-economic stuff.
No. John a chance to respond.
Hey, let me respond to that. So first of all, no one's talking about allowing the money overseas to come back onshore without being taxed. What's on the table is a 10% tax, lowering the tax rate. So if there's about $3 to $4 trillion overseas. So if $2 trillion comes back onshore at a 10% rate, that's $200 million. That's off the top. Before that money actually goes to work and infused into the market, and based upon the velocity of money, you're going to have that amount of money being taxed over and over and over with economic opportunity. So that's number one. Number two, when you look at the tax categories that he's proposing, the standardized tax deduction, he's proposing doubling that.
Eliminating those.
So $24,000.
Exactly, $24,000. So
no,
exactly.
Because most people get their biggest breaks from deductions. That what you're talking about only helps the super wealthy.
What that comment is completely ignoring the fact that I just stated. What he's trying to do is simplify it. Instead of all these different deductions and so forth, he's simplifying and saying, you know what? Instead of $12,500 annual deduction, right, standardized deduction, I'll just double that.
Well, speaking of ignoring the benefit of that is that a lot of families, you have to get a fancy pants accountant to do all these little deductions.
Listen, I don't disagree with that.
Very simple.
Very simple. Speaking of ignoring, I find it interesting when we talk about this because we've discussed this on this show and we've discussed it on other shows, you and I, before many times, that when the question of race relations comes up between Republicans and Democrats, Democrats tend to have one way of defining how the administration's working towards race relations, and Republicans always tend to go specifically to the economic plan and the economic policy. And whether you agree with that type of, with Republican economic policy or not aside, that tends to be the defense. I think a lot of people, and maybe that argument works to some degree, because if you believe that type of economic policy is going to better the lives, and that's what I was saying to you, if you believe it's going to better the lives of people in the long run, then, more power to you. I don't necessarily think it will. But I always find it interesting that no one on the Republican side ever wants to actually address the other issues that are race-related. And talking about Black Lives Matter, they switch the argument over to economics because that's where they feel like they can win the argument. I'm not done finished talking. That's where they finish. That's where they feel like they can finish the argument. Why do Republicans not address the violence against Black people from police officers? Why do they not address the general tone in the country that Donald Trump has brought to race relations and empowering certain people who have, racist feelings to feel like they've got a spokesperson? I mean, is it fair to change the topic to economics when a lot of people would argue that that's not really the only thing that race is racist?
Black people have been fighting in terms of racial issues ever since we got here. And we've been fighting ever since 1964, Civil Rights Act, right? And we'll be fighting, in perpetuity, right? So what my philosophy is, address Black issues through economic empowerment. That will bring some level of financial sustainability within our communities. When you look at old civil rights leaders, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and so forth, they were set and poised to bring about a financial empowerment, financial independence, which in my opinion has never come to fruition because we always, as a people, then as a society, always talk about race. Yeah, there are issues, right? When you look at Chicago, when you look at a lot of these inner cities, the first thing that's talked about are the racial issues, right? In fact, I was just in Chicago at the Black Congressional Caucus Foundation Economic Summit. One of the things I talked about, I said, you know what, when you look at Harlem, that's run and operated by black politicians at a time when real estate was being sold for $1, that they positioned black people, black nonprofits to acquire those properties? Because the point is ownership. If we own the community, control the community economically, then we can actually impose that financial power to change and bring about social justice.
Is he wrong?
Yes.
Is he wrong, really, that moment, that last statement, if you own it, you can change it?
That very last statement, if you own it, you can make changes. However, historically, the institution of whiteness and racism has undermined black ownership, black power, and black banking, which is why you don't see a huge amount of black ownership across the United States of America in relation to Harlem and people not buying property.
Isn't that what he said, though? I mean, he didn't say that. He didn't say that white people kept people from doing it.
Exactly.
Yeah. He said that they were not empowered to buy.
I said they're being undermined by the institution of whiteness. Because in Chicago, where you're talking about, they're not talking about.
So what you're saying?
So what I'm saying, in Chicago, they had redlining, where you literally could not get a loan to buy or own property in Chicago if you were African American, where they would not divert funds to certain communities if there were too many black and brown people there. It was very hard to be a property owner, and if you did, you were paying outrageous prices. If you were buying property in Harlem or maybe New Jersey, when they were giving black and Latino people subprime mortgages, even if they had credit just as good as white people, it makes it very hard to maintain that property when all of a sudden the Great Recession hits and your interest rate doubles or skyrockets.
So let me ask this, because I'm trying to learn here too, and I think that as I listen, your point makes a lot of sense, but then I come back to him and he says this, and I'm like, well, he's right. I mean, even if those leaders in Harlem had tried to empower people to buy those properties in Harlem, if they were to get subprime,
Clay, part of it is changing the culture and the mindset in the black community. We need to actually become black capitalists.
But if they have a great mindset and the bank won't give them a loan that's got a good...
I want to talk about banking, actually, because one
that's
of
your
my...
thing, girl. You love some banking.
Yeah, specifically black-owned banks. Dodd-Frank, the financial regulatory stranglehold, accelerated the demise of the black community bank.
And cut them in half.
They were
you mean the thing that Trump thinks that we should put back in place?
No, Dodd-Frank he wants to repeal.
No, he wants to take it away.
Dodd-Frank was put in place by Democrats. It was signed into law by Barack Obama. Right. And here's the problem. Black banks, a lot of them are smaller community banks. They don't have an army of lawyers. They don't have an army of accountants. They can't comply with this top-heavy Dodd-Frank regulation, and so they go out of business. So I'm very concerned, as you are too, Stanley, about the
on top of that, they can't take. They can only take so much risk as well.
Exactly.
But,
yes.
So the point that we seem to be missing here, we're talking about the policy. Policy can be corrected. I'll agree with you that Dodd-Frank hurt black banks. However,
that was created by Democrats.
No. It was unfortunately and unfortunately, it was a bipartisan product that was supported by Democrats and signed by Democrats.
Who cares who made it? Who cares? Why are we talking anything negative? Hold on. Clay, let him talk about the issue. What's the point in your point about the policy?
So just first, on a petty note, these guys are the ones that are saying Democrats made this and made that. I'm trying to talk about policies.
and they're the ones I'm yelling at.
Yeah. So now, in relation to black banking and Dodd-Frank, when you have a system, once again, that continues to prop up a certain group of people and undermine black communities, it is hard to build power. Let's look at the evolution of blackness in 4 phases. You have slavery. Then you have Jim Crow era, where you could only have certain kinds of jobs, and if you had a group of black people, they were sent to jail. And then you have Jim Crow era 2.0, where you could have some kind of economic opportunity, but you were still blocked from jobs. You were still harassed. You were still criminalized for being black. And now you have this era right here that has been pretty much destroyed through the criminal justice system and the quote-unquote war on drugs. When have African Americans had a consistent time to build wealth and be supported in the way that white people have, when white people had VA loans, where you had white people who can get loans for their businesses, where black people couldn't even cash their checks? I think the pieces that we're ignoring here are, one, Republican policies historically have not helped African Americans. Let me change that.
Do you think there's cities in the countries where the policies... Do you think... Give me a fucking break on that argument.
I didn't know we could say that.
Wow.
You mentioned slavery.
Yeah, but you can't claim that Republicans... I don't want to hear that argument.
You said Republican policy. So if
in fact, Republicans introduced the first civil rights bill in 1957, but Lyndon Baines Johnson, head of the Senate, pushed it back down into Senate and stripped it.
There must be some really good real estate in the sunken place, because you were just talking all of the All Lives Matter talking points.
I mean, it's ridiculous to apply that those Republicans would be Republicans today, or that Democrats today would be Democrats.
When you have Republicans who are, Jeff Sessions just put out a sweeping note saying that you should be charging people the highest penalty and going for the longest sentences for drug charges like marijuana and small possessions that Eric Holder had repealed. Do you know who that affects? Black people. Do you know who does most of the crack in America? White people. Listen, we can talk about the economics, but we have to address the fact that historically, black and brown people have gotten
arguably more white people are being affected.
No, John. Listen, 2 + 2 is 4. It's not 47. Historically, African Americans have been the ones who have gotten the brunt of the stick when it comes to negative policies. You can't say, well, why aren't they buying properties in Harlem and why aren't they doing this, when we're ignoring the fact that literally there have been policies, there has been a culture of racism that has set people back.
And no one's denying that.
No, you're actually denying
I'm not denying that.
Well, let's go with that for a second.
I just want to approach it and solve it.
You have to address
Let's go with that for a second, because we're going to have to wrap up. But before we go, because I've watched some nodding every once in a while when you two have been talking. It's not happened very much. But I want, before we leave, I would like for both of you to cede a point to the other side, to the other one of you. What is something that he has said that you actually believe he's right on, and the same thing for you?
Well, if he said 1,000 things, 999 of them were wrong.
Well, that's not what I asked for. I didn't ask for negativity now.
Clay, I'm trying to be petty. Let me flourish in my pettiness. So,
at least he admits it, right?
Oh, come on.
It's the third confession now.
Black petty feminist. But I think that he is right when he says that Democrats have failed the black community as well. And I think the reason why is because everyone, especially you two, are ignoring the historical process and the impact that racism has played in undermining black communities. And you can't address economics or anything else until we finally address the fact that racism is a huge black cloud over African Americans.
Okay, so he ceded the point that because I want to do it without a but at the end of it too. Right. He ceded the point that Democrats have not done a good job for race relations either.
Yes,
cede a point to him.
And I agree with you that there are issues. I'd be a fool if I didn't. Right? There are issues. What I'm saying, as we're addressing social issues, let's simultaneously bring about a financial empowerment element.
Sounded like a butt to me, but
and
what I'm saying is...
So I'm saying you can do both. Let's not lose the argument that we have to raise the financial literacy. You know, we just coming in, we had a sidebar, right, in the green room. We were talking about investing into Twitter, investing into different things. How many people in the black community on an average, or any given day, talk about investments? And let me tell you, I don't just talk that, right? I actually live it. Not only for myself, but I teach kids. There's certain apps, right? Of course, the kids don't have money, right? But they can learn. I had several kids during the summer and throughout the year embrace an app, invest. What do they invest in? Things that they know. Twitter, Snapchat, so forth, right? And then the kid was showing me, look, I have X number of gains, percentages, right? So we need to change the culture. Start with what you have.
Yes,
we invest too much into. We appreciate. I mean,
racism.
We invest too much. How's that racist?
No.
We invest
I'm sorry, John.
We invest too much into depreciating assets.
I think you're right about investing into the communities, but I also think we need to address racism. So now,
I agree.
In the spirit of working with you,
we need the music to play y'all off.
Right now,
I agree.
Right now, we're criminalizing marijuana. Meanwhile, Colorado has seen an explosion in their economy because they legalize it. Why don't we legalize marijuana in the United States, and then for the people who are selling it and were criminalized, erase those charges?
There's a topic for another day.
One more second.
We will go to that topic.
Yes,
one more second. When it is legalized, what we need to do is give those that were criminalized for it an opportunity and license to sell it.
Stanley Fritz.
About that.
Stanley Fritz.
Shake on that.
Jesus Christ. Stanley Fritz and John Burnett. Jesus, help us. God in heaven. Thank you guys very much for joining us. We'll certainly have you both back. We'll put one over here and one over there. And I'm going to have a switch for microphones. Thank you guys very much for being with us. We'll take this comment real quick from Linda Daniel on Facebook. We only talk about race in our own particular bubbles, which I agree with,
but
and that's what we're doing.
We're trying on the show. We're trying
real hard.
And John Rutecki says, I just wish they talked about the poor, not about race as much. Most poor happen to be non-white. I think
now
that's
we're getting back into the debate again. So let's transition
into
our bookster segment. Just throw up the graphic,
it's
please.
great to have those.
It is. No, it's
We'll have
great. I
that.
love it. I love it. I just hate that we don't have. We need to make
No, but
we need to make the whole hour a
They
topic
just
sometime.
shook hands on.
I know, and they're hugging now. They're hugging. Look at them hugging. Bookster segment. Sarah Hill's out sick today. She's not feeling well, but we're happy to have a fantastic author with us.
Yes.
Paul Kuhn is a writer and political analyst. David Kuhn. I don't know. David Paul Kuhn.
Yes.
Goodness, learn how to read.
With that accent, you should be able to do two names.
I should be. I know it should be. It's always Mary Beth or Mary Elizabeth or something like that. That's what I'm used to. David Paul Kuhn, tell us.
Bless his heart.
You've got it. It's a novel. It's a novel. But it's political at the same time. So tell us a little bit about it.
And in disclosure, David and I worked together at Politico. So yeah. Or did we ever actually work in this? Maybe for like a week we overlapped.
Maybe we crossed paths I saw you at Fox.
In this industry, that's like being cousins.
Basically, yes.
That's a long relationship. What made you want to write a novel instead of a book about, instead of a nonfiction?
Because novels let you get to larger truths, right? So you can, it's not that nonfiction is very important, and my next book probably will be a return to nonfiction, but novels allow you to get to something deeper in the human psyche and in our own experiences. And so even the title, right, we in news, we have this newsworthiness, but really the title's about what makes us feel worthy, what in our work, and as we go about our lives in our work, what can we do to, if we're going in the direction that we don't want to, what can we do to change the momentum of our lives and find that what we're doing makes us feel worthy?
So what's your story? What are the characters? What are they? How are they figuring this out?
The characters are many. There's two main characters, Kate and Taylor. And one is at the New York Times and one is at a new media outlet.
Thinly disguised as Politico, but yes.
So many have said. And really, if it was Politico, it's those formative years when media was being upended.
Or maybe
right?
it's an amalgamation of Politico, BuzzFeed, and Washington Post.
Either way, it was this very peculiar time, pre-Obama era, just coming into the Obama era, when media was being upended. The old media was
by the internet.
But it's not that the internet had been around for 10 years, but new media had come into its own. And the Times has caught up, and in fact, most of their political reporters are former Politico employees, actually. But at that time, nobody in Washington was going to the New York Times to know what was really going on in politics. They had lost their grip. And I use them just as an example. This was certainly true of the Post. The Post has revamped to many degrees as well. And that has changed because much of the old media has caught up, and now it's really all the same. Everybody's reading on their smartphones. So the novel takes place where there's a reporter in this old media world, and there's this reporter in the new media world, and then there's two presidential candidates. And ultimately, you see the reporters start to question their own work, but you also see the politicians lose hold of who they are, and all of them are sort of digesting and being digested by the tabloidization of politics and the tabloidization of media. Obviously, I wrote this not knowing Donald Trump was on the way, but I think it raises certain ideas that the media hasn't looked in its own mirror about how much Trump was a creature of them, rather than...
and so I know, David, a lot of people who, so this is with our bookstore community, millennial book enthusiasts, and a lot of aspiring writers. When I read your book, and it's an amazing book, I recommend it. It's very well written, it moves very quickly. But because I know you, I was like, this is pretty much semi-autobiographical, but did you ever feel like you were at risk? Because I know you write some pretty, I think, searing critiques of just basically Politico. Or just the political machine. Did you ever feel like you were afraid about that?
I had come to the decision I didn't care about what was across that bridge that I had passed. At the same time, I certainly, one of the 5 most influential columnists in the country, didn't want to touch the subject because she was concerned, or he was concerned about what was being written, about who was in proximity to the characters. But I mean, I don't want to dwell too much on the Politico because it's also, as you remember, Carrie, there's also a romantic story.
There's love interest, yes.
I think that it's not, although it takes place in the world of politics, and I definitely wanted to get through ideas about what's happening to media and our politics in this novel. There's a very human element that I think a lot of people can relate to, especially since your audience is millennials, about as you're choosing your work, or perhaps as your work has chosen you. That's just because you're succeeding in something, it's not always right, and sometimes it's important as we get taken to really second guess, or at least consider whether whether the momentum of your life is carrying you in the direction you really want to go. And so the novel is much about the politicians, and especially these two reporters, considering those qualities and those questions, really because they're both nearing the age of 30 and sort of that quarter-life crisis period in some people's lives. And so
titles usually have multiple meanings, right?
Yeah.
So how did you come upon this one, and what does it mean, not just for the story itself and the fictional part of the story, but the greater lesson you want people to take from it?
Well, what makes one's life feel worthy, right?
And that's something that these characters are grappling with.
That's something that the characters are grappling with, and the politicians, because they have to do certain things to win the presidency. And that's all based because I became very close with some presidential candidates over the years for different reasons. And I saw how they, too, are consumed by the process and often are willing to make many personal sacrifices to win.
And what about the aspect of journalism? Because I know you've moved on from journalism and now you're in a different industry. But in terms of the notion in your book that you write about that the story, you push it as far as you can and you walk it back if you have to. So you'd rather be first than be right.
That's right. That's right out of the novel. That's right. So that was one of the big changes, right? It was more important to be first than be deep. And as with all things, people adjust. It's almost so much a part of our reality now, 5, 8 years later, that we don't even question it. But the placing speed first, placing the flashy headline first. I mean, we're still, as much as the media, because today, for example, in Washington, it's found its place because it's got an antagonist that's a very easy antagonist to feel righteous about, and justifiably so in the president. Whether you're a conservative or a liberal, there's a lot that's going on that you as a reporter can find your place, and for once, I think for the first time in modern times, actually see the president and politicians in what is the proper role of reporters, antagonistic terms. You're not there to be friends. I have very little optimism that the media will maintain that role when the next president comes.
The antagonistic role.
Yeah, I have very little optimism the media will not return to that role, because proximity in Washington to your sourcing is a very deep problem. Sorry, as Carrie knows.
People are like, best man in someone's wedding or a bridesmaid, and you're supposed to be reporting on them. So I actually think, in some respects, what President Trump is doing with the media, I don't think that he's doing it in a healthy way, but I do think that there should be more of a separation to say, we're going to be a watchdog on this administration versus I'm going to be in bed with them, which really happens on Capitol Hill as well. A lot of times, literally even.
Well, that's how the entertainment world's reporting goes. I mean, it's very symbiotic. And I find as I'm listening to this, that it's fascinating. We're talking about this almost in a way, almost as if though it's a nonfiction, and I think it's important to remind people that it's not. But I want to ask you about the role that not the entertainment world plays, but that the fiction world in general can play in progressing society or issues. We see a lot of movies and TV shows now that are very much about the political machine. They're fictionalized characterizations. Do you think that you can get more done as far as social change with fiction than you can with nonfiction sometimes?
I mean, you clearly can in television. I mean, there's no doubt, and there's been this flourishing of political television, and some of its degrees are problematic, but everyone says that about their own industry. I think, to return full circle to how we began this segment, novels allow us to get to larger truths, and it's very important to put down your phone. If I can speak to readers out there and how you kids should be reading novels, it's really important to put down your phones and find time in the day to not just read nonfiction, but also novels, because you're going to find yourself getting inside of people and bursting bubbles. And if you are only reading novels that don't challenge you, then that's unfortunate. But at least with novels, because of the pacing, it's easier to go someplace else.
And you can humanize some of these issues.
You can humanize it. And as you see, I think as you read this novel, you see that there are certain characters, especially one of the presidential candidates, who ends up in a place where he or she is scum. But you kind of see what else about that character you did once love.
It's multidimensional.
And I think that it's important to humanize what is often a two-dimensional world of politics, and we get into these left-right debates, or Main Street, Wall Street debates, or Main Street, K Street being lobbying of Washington debates. And you see how the process corrupts those who went into it for the right reasons, right? Now, at the same time, the novel explains a lot of the deeper problems in our society, because you see book begins at a book party, where reporters and political aides and politicians are inside of a townhouse that Andy Warhol used to live in, right? That's based on my own experiences. And it's so a part of our reality now that reporters are no longer, right in this area near Penn Station. Used to be we're near the hub of the old Daily News. Now there's the new Daily News. But all these tradesmen, this world where reporters and politicians, or at least reporters and the political class, were at least more separated, in the sense that reporters were more able to find the role. And what I find is the reporters, as much as the politicians, are now removed from most of America.
Yeah, I think
right
that's what Donald Trump showed, was that a lot of the reporters have become a professionalized class, whereas before, like you said, it was blue collar, and now it's a bunch of Ivy League snobs.
It is.
In their
Did you just cede the point that Ivy League folks can be snobs?
Some of them are. Which is why I don't really talk about it that much.
Okay. Anyway, that's a topic for another day too. But I appreciate the fact that you can humanize something through a novel and in ways that you can't with nonfiction. So, what makes it worthy? I'm going to go get it now. I'm fascinated. I love political anything, but fiction, I think, is a fascinating way to impart some of that information. So, what makes it worthy? David Paul Kuhn. Pick it up. You can get it on Bookster. You can get it anywhere you can find a book. Thank you very much for being with us today, David.
Thanks for having me.
You've read it.
So I have, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, it's a great read. What's your favorite novel, by the way?
Oh God, right now.
Think about it.
I haven't think about it on the spot.
We'll give him some time.
We'll put it on.
Yes.
We'll put it on bold or something.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. We got a comment here from Kathleen Klein. Sad state of affairs to care more about being first than being correct. Real facts. When I worked for the United Press International, our tagline was "Be first, but first be right."
I think it's interesting. I never really. I mean, I think he mentioned something about how it's become normalized to us that we don't even think about it. But when you do stop for a second and think about it, something that's incredibly obvious, which is, in this world in the Twitter world, in this world where you throw stuff up on the website as quickly as you can, you forget that, that is the primary motivation for people. And how many times have we seen over the course of the last 5 years, some news organization, 24-hour news organization, and all three of them have had the problem where they reported something that they ended up having to walk back because it wasn't exactly right, because they were more interested in being first. And so, he makes this good point that we forget that that's possible until you really stop and think, wait a second. Yeah, it's not always about being right. It's always about being first.
It doesn't have to be that way.
Well, go get the book this weekend. Good weekend reading. It's supposed to be rainy here in New York. Wherever you are, hopefully it's not going to be rainy. But even if it isn't, get the book. It'll be something good to read. Feisty convo today.
Yeah.
Whew, I'm going to have to start wearing armor.
Your sweater's too.
It's not I need some padding in order to survive. Ooh, next week it'll be probably feisty again. Bring headgear of some kind. We'll see you here on Tuesday at 9 with Bold Business, and next Friday at 10. See you guys.